Hi, everyone. It's me, Tim. Today, I want to talk about the business side of game development. This is an answer to a question by Seth the Guy GD, who asks, I was wondering if you could explain the business side of the game industry. I know you started Troika. I would love to hear the business stuff about it. I know you have a video about Troika, but could you go further into the money aspect of it? Could you explain starting up a studio and dealing with hiring people, choosing and approaching publishers, getting funding for the game, insurance, banking, PR, office space, costs, advertising, and other things people wouldn't think of? Seth, this is a good question. And as a Priority Channel member, I'm moving it forward. There's already one on Monday. So yours will get pushed in right in the next in the queue. So you will be seeing this early next week. I'm filming this at the end of the previous week. It's a good question, and I have been thinking about this. I know you asked this a week ago. I wasn't ignoring it. I was thinking about it. I had to think about this one a long time, and let me tell you why, because I have reasons. And after I tell you the reasons, I'm going to tell you the reasons I told you the reasons. Reason one, I only ran one company, and it started 25 years ago. And I don't think I necessarily ran it well. So you asking me to talk about the business side of game development immediately made me go, whoa, should I even be doing this? I decided to. But I also want to say that at the very beginning, at the crucial beginning of Troika, we had Jason's spouse, Sharon Shellman, who had experience at the administrative level in companies. And she handled so many things that would have been hard for us to do. The three of us, Jason, Leonard, and I, had very little experience. I would like to say no experience. So she did things like contacted insurance agents, real estate agents. We, talked to the office people about leasing, the agents for the different offices. We want to go about leasing stuff. Now, yes, Jason and Leonard and I would make the final agreements on those, and we would sign whatever documents needed to be done. But Sharon handled vetting a lot of those things. We didn't have to go, oh my God, there's 20 different medical insurance policies we could get. Sharon had already looked through them and said, here, I think these are the three best, and here are the trade-offs. Great. You can't imagine how amazing it was having someone to do that. And then the third reason it took me a long time to respond to this question is I didn't take a lot of notes on the business side of things. My notes are full of game dev meetings and design ideas and discussions about events that happened during game development, and almost nothing about the business side of things. I did find some, and then that reminded me of other things, so I put this together. Now, let me tell you why I did decide to do this despite all those caveats. A lot of people like to talk about things that they have zero experience in. So I thought, well, at least I do have experience in this. It was a while ago, and I'm not necessarily saying I was very good at it, but at least I have experience. And all I need to tell anyone watching this is please beware of people who give you advice who have never, ever done the thing in what they're giving you advice for. Don't look any further than my channel where people tell me how to do game development who've never done it. People tell me how to be a better employer who've never done it. When I'm going to give you this business advice, this is coming from a place of experience. I've been both an employee and an employer. I would like to point out that the ratio, I ran Troika for 7 years, but I've been in the industry for 43, so Troika represents 1/6 of my experience. So I've been mostly an employee, but for about 1/6 of the time, an employer. So with all that behind, let's dive into Seth's questions. Okay, the very first thing that I'm going to say, which he didn't ask about, but I was going to say is you've got to incorporate. If you're going to make your own company, don't just do it as a self-owned thing. I would highly recommend at the very minimum you do a partnership. That's what we did at Troika. It was called an LLC, a limited liability company. It's kind of like a partnership with some of the protections of a corporation, or just dive right in and incorporate as like an S corp. Get a lawyer, have them explain this to you, but the reason you need to do this is it will protect you and any assets you have. What you don't want to have happen is some lawsuit happen against your game company, and I can talk about how that can happen, but you don't want that to have happen, and the next thing you know, somebody's coming to repossess your car or your house or your computer, any asset you have that's worth money. If you don't think you need this, let me just tell you that Troika got threatened with a lawsuit 3 times, and never by publishers. A couple times by people who didn't like that we started Troika, and then once by one of our own realtors who was mad that we were breaking the lease, but forgot to mention to their lawyer that they'd already rented out the space. So they were claiming a lot of damages that turned out there were no damages. Anyway, people threaten you with lawsuits all the time. It's nice to have that corporate veil of security. So let's jump into hiring people. When we started Troika, we had a huge advantage over most other companies that were starting, is that when we, Leonard and Jason and I, quit our previous company, this got reported. I saw it in magazines, on websites, in forums. So people knew we had left. And so when people asked us what we were doing, and I said, I'm starting a company, people we knew said they wanted to come work for us. People at local companies said, hey, what are you doing? I'd love to join a startup. And resumes just arrived, especially after Arcanum went out. 3 years into Troika, a lot of resumes arrived. And that's when we hired a lot of new people for Temple of Elemental Evil and Vampire Bloodlines. I mean, we really staffed up. We went from being 14 people to like 35 people in a few months. So we were in a very unique position. Once you make a game, you will probably start getting resumes. As far as choosing or even approaching publishers, we were lucky because we lived in LA. Tons of publishers up there. Also in San Diego. I mean, we could get in a car and an hour later, we could be at Activision, EA, Sony. I mean, big publishers. So we'd go to them. We'd call them up, email them, make appointments. Because we had Fallout under our belts, that did open doors. Didn't necessarily open wallets, but it opened doors. At least got us in there, let us say our piece. As for getting funding for a game, let me just tell you, the only time we've ever done that is as part of a publisher deal. I was never an indie. We were never self-funded. We never used venture capital. We never approached VCs. So I don't know that part of it. All I know is during the negotiation with the publisher, that's when you establish the budget. I want to remind you, too, when you're establishing the budget, you have to think a lot more than just the direct game development costs. You need to add an overhead. And if you've taken any business classes or even know a little bit about business, you already know that, in addition to someone's salary, you got to add things like their insurance, their portion of the office space and utilities and taxes and all the things that go overhead. Most people say, you add 10, 20, 30% to their base cost and that'll cover it. But you also have to remember that there's hardware in the office that's not being covered, software, office, additional office space. It's like you can't just figure out, oh, they sit in an office, so I'll take that office. There's conference rooms, there's kitchen, there's stuff you stock the kitchen with, there's utilities, there are people who work not directly in game dev. There's your receptionist, there's HR, there's admin, there's all kinds of people who do things that aren't directly associated with the game. In addition to that, you will have corporate taxes. You also pay taxes on employees. Like in the US, there's a tax that's half paid by the company and half paid by the employee. So you owe taxes and it's proportional to how much you pay them. Then there's insurance that doesn't have to do with, it's not the medical or dental insurance that you're paying for the employee. Your company gets insured itself. I'll give you an example. We were told when we were making Temple of Elemental Evil that we needed E&O insurance. That's called errors and omission. That's a special insurance that you buy so that if you ever make a product that gets sued because you either left something out that was important or put something in that caused a problem. In a game, maybe you're sued because people say, hey, you put something in, you ripped us off, we copyrighted that, it's maybe you didn't buy some software that you used, or you used an idea from another game and you used it too closely, because you can't copyright an idea, but you can copyright the instantiation of an idea. E&O covers that. Interestingly enough, they asked for it and we're like, okay, and I threw it in as a line item on what they had to pay us. And they're like, we're not going to pay you for that. And I was like, you want it, you have to pay for it. And let me tell you, E&O insurance back in the early 2000s was almost $1 million, which was over a third of what they were even paying us to do Temple. So they didn't want to do it. So I'm like, you want it, pay for it, or strike it out. It eventually went away. But there's other insurances you may need to get as a company doing business in whatever you're looking at, whatever area you're doing business in. So you have to look into that. Speaking of insurance, though, you're going to have to at least do medical, dental, vision, at least in the U.S., for your employees, which means contacting a bunch of insurance companies, talking to insurance agents. Like I said, we had Sharon do that. I would recommend that if you start a company, one of the first things you plan to hire is someone in HR that handles a lot of these things. And by the way, that again that's an expense that you're going to have to include in however you're getting your games funded. Banking. I remember desperately wanting to use the credit union that I personally was at, but they did not allow business accounts. And the reason you need a business account is once you incorporate, you get a tax ID, and any financial accounts you have to be associated with that ID. So we ended up getting a bank account at a bank I hate. I've always hated them. I still hate them. But it also turned out that we couldn't have used a credit union anyway, because most of them don't allow wires, financial wires. I don't know if they still use that, but some credit unions don't allow transfers the way banks do, especially if it's happening internationally. And you never know, if you work at a big publisher, where your money's going to come from. For all you know, you may be working with a publisher who's sending your money from London. So you have to have a bank account that can accept an international money transfer. Look into that. I talked about making sure that you included a bunch of overhead in the cost of your game development for your funding. I want to deep dive into that for a second about offices, because first of all, you're going to have to estimate right away how many people are going to be working on your game maximum, and make sure you have enough office space for them, because the cost, of course, is square footage. So you're going to have to know how many people you're going to have and figure out if you have enough space to put them in. People always underestimated this in the 90s, and that's why at one point I was crammed into a room with 13 other people. It was a nightmare. Imagine trying to code when you have a fax printer right next to your head. One thing you really want to look at is whether your office includes utilities. Some do, some don't, some partially do. Like they include water but not electricity. The reason I bring this up is our electric bill at Troika was way higher than anyone estimated it to be. When you get an office space, you can often ask them to estimate utilities. Our electric bill was way higher for multiple reasons. One, we had a lot more computers than regular offices had back then. You know, some people didn't have computers. We had people who had multiple computers. It was very common to have 2 computers on the desk of most of the 3D artists and even some of the programmers, because that way they could compile stuff on the side, render art on the side. So, and often those were left running overnight. So most companies, everybody went home at night and the electric bill dropped. Ours stayed high. That included AC. If people are there, then with the AC on, having all those extra computers generated a lot of heat. Our AC bill was astronomical. Another thing to look into is whether your office includes parking spaces. Usually, there's a parking lot associated with your office, and they will say you have these number of spaces, and it's based on their estimate of how you're going to put people into those offices. It always seemed really low. Like there were these big offices that at any company I'd ever worked at would hold 2 or 3 people, and they said, oh no, that's for one person. So there was one parking spot. So we would commonly go to some place and they're like, here's your building. There are your 10 parking spots. And we're like, there's going to be 15 of us. So sometimes you have to pay for the extra parking. Sometimes they'll go, well, you only have 10 reserved, and then there's a spot where that's first come, first serve. And then you end up with people who, if they come to work later in the day, which many game developers did, they couldn't find parking. That happened at companies I worked at. We tried to avoid that at Troika. You also have to think of hours. If you rent in an office building, and basically any building where you don't have direct access from the outside, like we bought a lot of office spaces in industrial areas where your door was walked right into your own reception area. If you're getting an office building where you have to go in to a lobby and maybe take an elevator up to your floor, you have to find out about access. Your employees will require key cards to get in. There will be security guards. Names may have to go on lists because they say this person may be here at night or maybe coming in on the weekend or whatever. Especially if you have people who want to work different shifts. We had some people who wanted to work slightly outside of core hours. Sometimes we had to come in outside of core hours to talk to people who weren't in our time zones. Cleaning was often, if you worked in a big high rise, cleaning was included, but it was very specific hours. So sometimes they would be scheduled to come in at 6 because most people left at 5. And usually a lot of people were still there, so they had to clean around them. So they didn't do as good a cleaning job. Sometimes the cleaning staff would complain that the office was still in full, motion and they had to come in and clean. If you have your own space, you have to hire your own cleaning services. You have to decide, is it every day? Is it 3 times a week? Is it once a week? What's going to be enough for you? Cost. Now, Seth, a lot of your other questions, you asked about PR, advertising, localization, distribution. Those were all things, because we didn't self-fund. We weren't indie. We weren't VC. Those were things that the publisher handled. So those were things that were part of their duty to do, and it's why we received a very small percentage of royalty that usually didn't kick in until you sold a lot. But I talked about that in the publisher contract video already. So I'm not going to talk about that here because that wasn't something I had to think about. It was handled by someone else. So I think, Seth, that's all the stuff I can answer about the business side of things based on what I can remember and the few notes I have and the one company I ran. I hope this helps. And I know a lot of other people have asked questions about this too. So I'm glad I finally did a video about this.